Hey guys, we are in my office today and I just got finished with working with a client and I thought the topic of conversation would be a really good one to make a short video to send to you guys so that you could identify some things maybe in your own life. The topic that my client and I were discussing was trauma response, and I recently talked about trauma, chronic illness, and dissociation. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about trauma response. So what I'm going to do is just simply give you guys a brief list of what trauma response might look like. And this is medical trauma, any type of life trauma, but with chronic illness, this could really be medical trauma. So I'm going to break it down into 4 sections. And each of those sections I'll identify and know that all of this falls under trauma response. I won't go into detail with the limbic system and how the neurology of the brain works regarding trauma, but I will talk about each of these as far as the response goes. And if you like it, we can always go into any of the 4 sections or talk about your limbic system and how we function in survival mode or within trauma response. And the first one is flight. Often looks like a workaholic. So as a chronic illness person, sometimes that may not sound possible for us. Like, how could I be a workaholic if I can barely function or hold down a job? Look at that as more a taskaholic. And if you're not able to task, are you beating yourself up? Are you talking bad to yourself? Are you bullying yourself because you weren't able to produce more in your day and you're a failure because you aren't able to accomplish tasks or lists of tasks or work? So workaholic falls under flight. An overthinker, so thinking too much, overthinking, being invasive in other parts of your day where it's not applicable or appropriate. Another section of flight would be anxiety, panic, OCD. OCD is a diagnosis, and I'm not suggesting that people with trauma response all get OCD, but in my research and in my work, I have found that a lot of my OCD clients actually have trauma in their history. So I do believe there's a very strong connection there, and I've done quite a bit of research in my PhD studies when I was doing my PhD regarding trauma and OCD. Another response of the flight mechanism in trauma is difficulty sitting still. So where with chronic illness you might have a difficult, let's say with Ehlers, like I have Ehlers, many of you have Ehlers, we have a hard time with mobility, but that doesn't mean that we have an easy time sitting still. Do you fidget? Do you jerk around? Are you hypervigilant? Do you have to fiddle with things? Are you always doing something in your lap or moving from position to position, whatever that looks like? And lastly, is a perfectionist. Are you a perfectionist? Do you have to have everything just right? Is falling short of perfectionism a flaw? Means you're not good enough? And in that case, you're never good enough because perfection is not attainable. There are probably others that fall under flight, but that is definitely a start to the list. I'd like for you to share some other things that I've missed in my short list of flight response in the comments. That'd be awesome. The next one we want to talk about is fight. So the word fight often creates a mental picture of literally fighting, fist to fist or physical altercations, but this could look like anger outbursts, snappiness, anger in inappropriate times, seemingly exploding with anger over small things that the anger is actually disproportionate to the situation. The next one would be controlling. People who are excessively controlling, everything has to be within their control, or they have meltdowns. People who can't function or find themselves in distress when things are out of their control. That falls under fight. Being the bully. So if we can quote that, the bully, would be under fight, picking on people, belittling people, demeaning people, doing things to bully people into doing what you want as a rule of function. If they don't do what I want, then I don't want them in my life. That would also fall under controlling as well. The next one would be narcissistic. So not necessarily narcissistic personality disorder, but narcissistic tendencies, thinking you're the center of everything, expecting to be the center of everything, thinking everyone's looking at you, thinking everyone's watching you, thinking people are thinking about you, that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily mean vanity, but it does mean that you have displaced yourself in the center of other people's worlds and have an expectation that people are behaving in such a way, whether it's positive or negative toward you. Narcissistic. And lastly, on the fight list, explosive behavior. That could look like anything from crying, screaming, throwing things, irrational responses that are amplified no matter what that response is. So that would be under fight as well. Again, like under flight, I did not make a comprehensive list, so please feel free to drop some things in the comments to fill in the gaps that I've left. 2 more. We've done 2. The next one would be freeze, fight, flight, fight, or freeze. Freeze being difficulty making decisions. So this is not necessarily saying, oh, I don't know, you choose where we're eating. No, you choose where we're eating. That's just a person thing, but not being able to decide to the point that it delays things. You lose time, you lose opportunities, can't decide, regret decisions that finally were made, that sort of thing. Freeze is also a feeling of being stuck. I can't move forward, I can't do better, I can't get out of this pit, I'm frozen, nothing's going to change, I'm always going to be this way, situations are always going to be this way, I'm always going to be treated this way, that sort of thing. Freeze is also dissociation. This goes back to my last video talking about dissociation and chronic illness. Dissociation is depersonalization or derealization, big fancy words for not feeling real, not feeling like life is real. Am I really here? Is this really happening? Who am I in the scheme of things? Or essentially zoning out, going on mental vacation for a period of time where you've lost time. Now that's the important key. Have you lost time? Time passes without you being able to acknowledge it or realize it. That is where dissociation kicks in. And the last one on freeze is isolating, removing yourself from social situations, pulling away from others. So in chronic illness, this can happen just by nature because others pull away from you, not realizing how to manage a relationship with you or giving up on inviting you out, so forth. It's forgetting about you, that kind of thing, and that can really be a challenge. But this isolation is due to you pulling away from others because of your trauma response. So that is freeze. Lastly, we have fawn. So this one isn't talked about as much as flight, fight, and freeze. Fawn is actually a more passive role. If you think about a baby deer, F-A-W-N, fawn. In the fawn mode of trauma response, you become a people pleaser, giving others what they want, no matter how you feel or what you want. Lack of identity, giving up who you are as a person for other people, or giving up your sense of who you are because of situations. That's fawn. It hurts less to be someone else, or it hurts less to not be yourself. So I will forego my identity to fawn, if you will. No boundaries. They set up no boundaries. They are run over. They get hurt easily because people don't respect what boundaries they should or could perceive to be someone else's boundary line. And oftentimes this area, if you are in fawn mode, this area actually is a red flag of welcome to rolling out the red carpet, if you will, to people who are abusive, because they can they can target and abuse people in fawn mode of trauma response much easier without having to groom other people into this mode, such as gaslighting. People in fawn mode often feel excessively overwhelmed, and that can actually shut you down and move you back into freeze mode. But overwhelmed and tend to feed into the people pleasing, I'm overwhelmed, you just make the decision, or I'm overwhelmed, oh yeah, I like your idea, when really if you sat down and were able to process it, no, I don't like your idea, I have my own opinions, and no, I don't want to do that because it's not who I am. And lastly, these people who are in fawn mode due to trauma tend to be codependent. They tend to fall into codependency because it's easier, and that also falls into that lack of identity situation and people pleasing. It's easier to be codependent and let others make decisions than it is to have to deal with more stimulus when you are already overstimulated. And people with living in trauma response in all 4 areas are actually overstimulated and tend to engage the trauma response due to the brain being overwhelmed, due to the brain being in survival mode to try to protect self and potential harm or further harm. Okay, so that is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn to cover the 4 sections of trauma response. All of these can happen with gaslighting, medical gaslighting. You guys write me a lot about your experience regarding medical gaslighting. I just thought this would be a great sort of few moments to talk about trauma response as it pertains to our experience with chronic illness, my experience with Ehlers, and the lack of knowledge that doctors seem to, I would say the copious amount of lack of knowledge doctors tend to not care to mitigate or fix on their own parts. So I hope to see you again next time. I'm happy you stopped by and checked out what's going on over here. Let me know in the comments if you want me to elaborate on any of this, or if you have things to fill in regarding these 4 sections of trauma response. Okay, take care. Bye.